Dear friends and colleagues, let me start while you are taking your seats, and then I will suggest our speakers to speak wherever they like to be seated when speaking. So I would like to welcome all of you to our session on modern challenges for public administration. And you know, over the past 2 or 3 years, the discussion on public administration has become one of the key topics on the agenda, and Herman Gref, to my mind, it's my personal opinion, has become the key person in this discussion, because Mr. Gref has always underscored the importance of understanding the key role of public administration, even as compared to various economic factors. So this is one of the challenges which we are going to discuss now. And I would also like to add one more thing. Modern technologies now lead to the fact that it's the quality of public administration that becomes the key factor in competition between the countries. It's not the products, not the people, but the governance models that help you be competitive today. And now I would even say expensive, high-qualified workforce is even more valuable than mass, cheap workforce. And it's the quality of public administration that a country can be proud of. And you know, it's not huge, long payback investments start playing the key role, but quick investments. You can start production quickly and make money. You don't have to invest and wait for 40 years for a payback. And since now you can produce something, sell quickly and ensure quick turnover, it helps you get better adapted to this changing world, and this is more convenient for the businesses and for capital movement. And this means that the role of the state should be focused on ensuring stability and predictability of the rules of the games, and not just on strict regulation of all and every economic and social process. The topic of efficiency of public administration is a topic you can discuss for hours. So I suggest we focus on the most important topics. Who do we have here as our panelists? It's Herman Gref, the head of a group of strategic developments, Maria Shklerou, who is vice president of the Fund of Strategic Developments, who is the organizer of the working group, which is headed by Herman Gref. Alexey Komissarov, pro-rector of the Academy of National Economy and Public Administration. He is the director of the Higher School of Public Administration. And he has launched fantastic projects last year. It is preparation of the standby successors for public administration and many other projects. He'll tell us about them. I'm very glad to welcome Mr. Sergei, the new president of the Russian Academy of Science. And we very much hope that now Russian science will be reborn. And he suggested participating in this very session for a reason, because the future of the state depends on the future of science and vice versa. And I think this is one of our most successful solutions and decisions for this session. And now, Sir Francis Anthony Aylmer, Maude, Baron Maude of Horsham. This is the person who was in charge of public administration in the United Kingdom. And we also have Alexey Andrei Slepnev, Deputy Chief of Government Staff of the Russian Federation. And he's going to talk about a very trendy topic we have for discussion for today. So I think we'll have a very interesting discussion. And Herman Gref is the first to open the discussion. Distinguished colleagues, for me it is a true honor to be here among you. And let me say that it's the first time I'm sitting in a panel next to the president of the Russian Academy of Sciences, and I'm very glad it happened finally. You know, I think if we now identify our key disease in the Academy of Sciences, in Sberbank, in any region, you will see that the key disease is poor public administration. The more complex, the larger the structure is, the organization is, the higher the gravity of this disease, the higher the severity of this disease. So the question is, how can we make the system of public administration more flexible, easier to change, considering this quickly changing world? And of course, the state, by definition, is not a flexible organism. And making public administration flexible is a fundamental challenge. And of course, there is no one key that fits every lock. There is no single recipe how to achieve this. But there is one good advice. Take advantage of the best practices globally. And first of all, our best practices, our own best practices, which are implemented, best of all, in the business. Because business develops in a competitive environment. That's why the best practices are also born in business community. That's why we need to ensure this transfer of best practices in business into public administration. And our challenge is to increase flexibility of public administration. And if we talk about the state's role in the digital era, of course, it's creation of the necessary institutions. First of all, it's education. Education is the key in this period when the key driver of the economic growth and the key driver in everything is human. And of course, education, it's like universities of the third generation. It's practice, science, and education. It's all together. And if there is no practice in education, if we give children knowledge without helping them acquire skills, it makes no sense. If we do not if we are not involved in science and research, we will always be behind the world. And of course, all systems like healthcare, social welfare, and so on, all this is interlinked. And the question is, how today can we unite all these elements in the framework of reform of public administration? When we talk about business or giant corporations, we very often mention the word platform, platform-based solution for this and for that. And there is a list of at least 10 words or phrases denoting the elements of a platform and what it means. A platform is like a huge data processing factory, and all this is called now a platform. And when Alexey Kudrin's group was working on this, actually, I am here in this session, a panelist, because Alexey Kudrin was not able to attend the session today because he's just caught a cold, unfortunately. But still, myself and my colleague will try to tell you about at least a piece of this work we are working on. We are trying to build the state as a platform. And The question is, why are we building this platform? What is a platform? And what is the process of administration? Administration means making decisions. So when we talk about decision-making, about big data, artificial intelligence, we are saying that making decisions now is a much more accurate process. What is success in life? Success is the number of decisions in life, of correct decisions a person has taken in life. Out of all the decisions you have made, what is success of a state? It is the accuracy of state-made decisions. What does this accuracy of decisions depend on? Unfortunately, it doesn't work. Okay, so what does this accuracy of decision-making depend on? On availability or lack of information, right? Information, you retrieve it from data. All the decisions we make can be made swiftly, can be made in a situation where you have no data, where you have no certainty. And the toughest nightmare for any manager is to have to make a quick decision, having no data and no certainty. I see a general. For any military person, I think it is the toughest thing when in a wartime, during a battle, you have to make a decision which way to go, what to do, when you have absolutely no information about the number of enemies around and location and whatever, and you still have to make this decision. So when we are talking about a new approach of a state to public administration, it's data-driven decision-making. This is what I'm talking about, right? It's a decision not based on emotions, not based on any subjective preferences and whatever. It's just data-based decision-making. How can we ensure that we have it? We need a large pool of data, an ocean of data, I would say, and we need a driver an engine which will make it possible to retrieve a large amount of information from these data and even make simple decisions without human participation. Why do you need a human to decide, issue a passport, not issue a passport, issue a birth certificate or not, issue a pension record or not? All these simple decisions can be made without a human being in the middle. It can all be done with the help of algorithms based on the rules that we have. And this state as a platform concept, we discussed it for a long time, and then we came to a conclusion after we collected the opinion of really wise men. We saw that everyone understands state as a platform in his or her own way. We tried to roughly draft what a platform in this case means, state as a platform, terms and definitions. Here, well, we have lots of slides about this, so some key terms and definitions to understand what is a state as a platform. We made this based on our experience and based on our vision and vision of our engineers of how big systems are organized. We took our systems as an example. I mean our systems in Sberbank and systems in the major corporations like Google, Alibaba, and the others. And this is our understanding of what is the state as a platform, or platform-based state. And here you see business, citizens, and IoT devices, or Internet of Things, where everyone generates information and you learn making decisions, complex decisions are made by people. Simple decisions are made automatically. And I think that this has not yet been implemented in any country. Many states are on their way to it. Singapore is the most advanced of all states in this respect, and Mrs. Po was here not long ago, and I was so much surprised to see how much they've done over the past year only in this respect. It's a small country. It's 1/3 of Moscow only. And of course, they are much more ready for such a transformation. But for us, understanding of the final goal is crucial, because then we'll be able to formulate specific goals to all the ministries. But this is a completely different type, a completely different approach to the reform of the state. We should not try to reproduce the best of the best of yesterday, but we want to go straight into the future. And last thing I wanted to say, I do understand that, this is probably an abstract discussion, an abstract image I'm trying to paint right now for you, but it's difficult to explain to you in such little time all the elements and details. Maria, she's going to talk in more detail about all the elements. But yesterday, Vladimir Maude invited all of us to a meeting last night, and Anatoly Chubais told me, well, me and him, we have a long-standing theory discussion. There are fundamental things like what I do is materials, nanotechnologies, and so on, which will always be demanded, said Anatoly Chubais. I said, of course. He said, if we now produce the most advanced PET-CT, for instance, for scanning cancer patients, there is a huge shortage of diagnostic equipment. The incidence of cancer is now growing, and the number of people needing help is growing, and we need to build a lot of these centers. So what's the role of digital technologies? How can you be helpful here, he said. I said, the role of digital technologies is that if we make a platform-based healthcare, we'll have much fewer cancer patients. Because if we collect all these data in one source, and like IBM, for instance, if they learn the system to recognize 83 varieties of cancer and gives automatically recommendations on how to treat, or gene analysis, or
indeed, what are the chances for a specific disease outbreak? Indeed, the cost of treatment will change dramatically. The number of people who are applying their intellect to simple procedures will be much lower. The number of people centered on individual help will increase significantly. And this is indeed one of the consequences of a state as a platform. I believe that this is an important change, and having an appetite for such grand things, or an absence of appetite for such things, is an important question which will be standing before us during the next political cycle. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I understand that you're pressed for time, but unfortunately, Alexey Leonidovich is in hospital. And we thank Mr. Gref for covering this and having this impromptu contribution. I would like to ask a question. The state as a platform, Is this something like an element of the state dying out? Because we remember that the Marxists proposed that the state would die away with many of its functions and elements supplanted with technologies. Some is understood in a different way. Well, I think there are two components to this to an answer. There is the what is happening with the governing function to begin with. Are we managing ourselves? Are we governing? It really brings us to the question of the freedom of will. Are we in a position to influence our own decisions, or is this some intellect or something that makes this decision a moment before we're consciously making our choice? So the deeper we go inside human brain, the deeper we try to understand the principles of central nervous activity, the more we turn to the question of the role of human in any system of government, for that matter. If the state is dwindling because a set of functions assumed by algorithms instead of people or humans, no, I don't think so. The state is changing its image, its face. It is becoming more convenient. It should become more convenient. It is becoming less noticeable. A state may be in your pocket, and it will be in the pocket. And at some point, it may even be, we're talking about, 50 billion things which are related to each other and generate data. So the state as a platform must provide for accurate coordination and work of these myriads of things, and there have to be algorithms for not only storing but processing of this information. Then the question comes, where are the people? Where is the human? Humans are losing jobs. Then let's see what jobs are people losing. A bureaucrat in an office taking in your paper and issuing more paper, he is losing the job? Fine, that's no problem. He will go to a different field and will add to the economy rather than subtract from the economy, as he or she is doing now. We won't have to stand in lines. We won't have to stand up in queues. When I said during the previous session, I said that we can provide for digitization of many banks. My personal task is no. The operationists want to see you for sure. By the way, often our banks, our offices are visited exactly because of our operationists, front desk managers. But the reason why I'm saying this is that people would not go to the bank to see Mr. Gref or even a beautiful front desk manager. People wish to have the services in their pocket. So it may be that we will see major changes in how the how the governmental functions are executed. It's true. Red tape should be abandoned, really, and in this sense, the government will dwindle, and bureaucracy will dwindle, and the red tape will dwindle, and the ability of the state to influence or to pressurize a private citizen will be smaller, which is of course a good thing. At least this is what we hope for. From the standpoint standpoint of both technology, from the standpoint of what Alexey Komissarov does. These are all measures towards that end. Thank you. Well, if I may ask Maria to pick up that line of deliberation. I'm very sorry, Mr. Maude, if I may leave now. Well, while we have this exchange of gifts, let me thank all of you and have the presentation ready. I am really will be speaking in the stead of Alexey Leonidovich. The two key things that I think need to be said about the reform of state governance and public administration is the state for citizens and the state as a platform. What are the main problems? I think that some of these problems are enlisted here, and we can see that the government is slowly drifting towards this program. But there is a big problem of inertia, and when decisions need several ministries or agencies to coordinate, that creates a problem. We have long analyzed the reform of 2004, and unfortunately we saw that the succession of events were not particularly well-paced, and it appears that strategic priorities are often left out of our vision. So what we're trying to do is to say that what are the three main goals. Many would say we would not see great coordination in the opinions. A lot has been said over the past years about the need to improve the business environment, the business climate, and this is the selective improvement of business environment in ratings, indices, and regulatory matters. So you can see these indices on this graph. Doing business, GCI, WGI, and we had some progress in 2010, and it appears that it may be easy to open up a business, but this opening up a new business or establishing a new business with the great difficulties bedamning it in the next phase of existence is not much of an advantage. So what is the purpose of the reform of public administration? The state must be oriented towards a result for the citizens and the business from the standpoint of culture, the values, and practice. The four key trends which we see here: the strategic government through a regular management, state as a platform, and a comfortable regulatory environment. The reform of civil service as an instrument of conducting key reforms, a technological revolution, the doubling of export, lowering of the share of the state in the economy, investment into human development, the pension reform, new regional and urban policies, and controlled inflation. If I may ask a question, what is this plan until 2024? I see. So these calculations are reflected in our macro prognosis, and we can see where these phases of investment must be coming from. It's a very multifactorial analysis, but I think that it's realistic. We believe that this program can only be implemented with the strategic planning on the part of the state. There is the general goal setting, and these objectives, these goals must be compliant with the overall reform. So we have to have a decomposing of the overall systems of the documents for strategical planning. We have a general program of strategic planning, but unfortunately it's too cumbersome. It includes over 170 documents on the state level, the governmental level, and we believe that rational approach to a more consistent view of the reforms is the necessity for any government of Russia. So we should have a situation whereby ministers and heads of the Russian governmental bodies have at least 3 monthly discussion as to what needs to be done. And the problem here is, of course, also about imitation. There are many procedures which unfortunately do not serve the announced purpose. So together with the Ministry of Economy, we're working together with coordinating the budget process with the strategic initiative planning. We also think that there have to be a priority in this budgetary portfolio to concentrate on the priorities. We believe that we need to conduct an analysis and remove the doubling of functions on the part of different governmental bodies. So we believe that there has to be a center, which is indeed a body of the executive, which is responsible for implementation of result-oriented governance, the removal of the doubling of functions, analysis of the compliance of functions to strategic goals, and the digital transformation of the state services or civil service services in terms of the controlling activities. Without such single center of reform, the haphazard and motley picture of digital initiatives would not lead to an overall and consistent reform. Unfortunately, quite often the imitation is taking the place of the real change. So we believe that while the initiative of the open government must continue to develop, but this also needs to be related to political competition, competitiveness, and the role of the society in decision-making process. We know that many governors in Russia have started such groups of talking to civil society, and this is an initiative that must continue to develop. There is another point which is the initiative of budgeting, and why is it important? This is important because we have conducted a poll. What is it that the citizens believe that where they're responsible? Where do the citizens believe that they can influence anything? Well, you see that there is a dramatic decrease from, say, family to the national scale, and indeed people hardly feel that they can influence anything on the level of even their city or their urban or countryside settlement, let alone the national scale, unless citizens eventually feel themselves empowered to affect or influence the change. There's hardly any consistent ways of public control can be effectuated. This can be done through various institutions of the civil society. And please start your voting at the sound of timer. You can only choose one option.
Все, конец голосования.
Okay, end of voting. I hope you have had time to vote. Let's see the results. Oh, that's a surprise for me. I see the audience wants e-platforms to be an efficient tool of development of feedback, and I think this is an important element, and this will be an element of the state as a platform, I'm sure. I'm not going to talk about this for a long time because Mr. Gref has already said a lot about it. Here you see our key performance indicators for 2024 to have an ocean, a pool, an ocean of data so that we can make decisions based on these data with the help of neural networks, artificial intelligence, and whatever. I'm not saying these data should be all open, even though this is also important to have them open, but at least in a closed loop they should be available. And about 50 most demanded, most important and necessary state services, public services should be available. In Germany, only 20 public services are available in this format. But anyway, this is what will help us transform all the processes that are behind the public services provision and to make a state a platform. Here is what we think will be necessary. We think that a very powerful re-engineering of all the business processes is a must, and we need to re-engineer processes at interministerial level. Now we're talking about project management since last year, and I hope that the process management will become more and more important now, because it's about efficiency we need to achieve. This is the slide Mr. Gref was talking about the changes due to a technological platform-based state solution. And you see this data-driven government decision-making process. You see that this is a really cool algorithm. 0 seconds, 0 bureaucrats involved in making quick decisions. Tactical and strategic decisions, these are different levels, but the decision makers in this case, they will make their decisions based on a completely different scope of information. And Alexey is going to talk about the skills that will be necessary for decision makers. Because now in real life, when you have such a huge mass of data which become available in no time, and you have no time to process the data, And of course, I'm not going to talk about this for a long time, but the main thing I wanted to say now is that we have to develop something we don't have yet in public administration. I mean implementation of full cycle personnel management with evaluation, assessment, and changing approach to implementation of the HR policy. We need to know where and what we have to change in terms of staff management, because currently we are talking about the knowledge of laws and so on, while we understand that the approach should be dramatically changed. Yes, we need a separate agency or authority to be responsible for human resource management in the public administration. We need to develop single, unified methodological approaches to HR policy. And finally, I'd like to talk about the comfortable regulatory environment. Element number 4, which is a must. We need to reduce the administrative burden on organizations and citizens. I think the main idea is that the number of control functions in our control and surveillance agencies, these functions are too many to be successful. That's why we need to reduce the control and surveillance functions. Possibly we can somehow clusterize them, but we need to reduce the number of controllers, and this is what may really reduce the burden on the businesses. And very last thing I wanted to say is that the deregulation policy we suggest is another must. It should be considered as a growth tool. OECD now considers this as these 3 policies as the key driver of success. We need to harmonize the best practices and integrate them in our regulatory framework, and we need to develop understandable language at the public administration level, because all our laws and regulations should be discussed in a language that everyone can understand. And now, since I'm in charge of the Society Institute, let me say once again that the reform is not going to be carried out in vacuum, and we need to understand how to properly manage this process in the current environment. Here is the design of the administrative reform we suggest, considering institutional limitations of administrative reform. Like now, the problem is that the red tape at middle and lower levels is really complex, it's not accountable, and very often the decision is implemented just in the opposite way as it was supposed to be implemented. That's why we need to increase the involvement of the key stakeholder groups in monitoring of results of implementation of strategic documents. And we need to very carefully prioritize our goals. National weakness of the government, because we understand that in our country, with our constitution, the government per se is weaker, and that's why there is a competition for administrative resources with elite groups. On the other hand, we have to digitalize the processes, because if we leave out the bureaucrats from decision-making process, the decision-making process will be more efficient and quick. That's why we need, again, like I said, to completely transform our HR policy at the level of public administration. And please pick up your voting devices again. My question is, should we accompany the reform of public administration administration with expansion of political competition. Yes, because otherwise, here you can see the options of answers. There are only two, so please vote. It's anonymous. Voting is anonymous. Okay. It's ticking as it were a bomb, which will explode. I love the sound. Okay, let's wait. I think everyone has voted. Okay, we can close the voting then and see the result. I love this answer. I think it is the right answer. And it is a good way to start the next cycle of discussion. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for such an interesting presentation. Thanks for attention. Now let me change the sequence of speakers. I think it's now the time to give the floor to Alexey Sergei, President of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Tell me, what does the science want from the state, apart from wishing that the state does not interfere too much in science? And apart from money. We are not discussing money here. Thank you, Vladimir, for giving me the floor. Thank you for this question. Thank you for inviting me to your forum, first of all. I'm not sure whether the former heads of the Russian Academy of Sciences have attended your forum in the previous years, but for me at least, it is a real pleasure to listen to your debates, and sometimes I am even wishing I could say a word or a comment. First thing I wanted to say, I wasn't going to talk about this, but let me say it. The first presentation here by Herman Gref, it made me think about something. You know, not even lately, but in the epoch of the new Russia, we started speaking in different languages about the same thing, probably. And probably it's really high time that we start learning the language of each other in order to solve the problems in the public administration jointly, so that we can even word these problems in the same language, using the same terms and definitions. This is not only about science. Over the past 3 months since I became the president of the Russian Academy of Sciences, I have had a huge number of meetings with those who have liberal opinion of the economy and those who think that the economy should be state-driven. And very often I feel that we are talking about sort of the same things, but how can we synchronize our thinking and our discussion? And I think what I'm going to say now, maybe it will make you think that we need to go this way. Public administration. Can public administration be an exact science? Can it be accurate and exact? Let's think at accurate sciences like mathematics and physics. In 1950s, when genetics started booming, now even better, we know that biology has become a science like mathematics. Medicine is also now becoming an exact science. Environmental science as well is based now on some algorithms and equations. But when talking about humanitarian things like economics, public administration. There is an uncertainty in much of the issue. You see, the Federal Reserve changed the rate, and who knows what will be the next change. Or you take the President of the United States. He is a big uncertainty in the right parts of the equation. How can we structure economy and relationships when in these equations there are elements which are highly uncertain? Talking about public administration, it seems to me that in principle, with time, we can expect public administration to become more and more accurate. It's about big data and data management, of course. And you asked a good question. Now that the public administration is becoming more accurate, does that mean higher involvement of state in everything or less? We cannot give a single answer to this question. But if we talk about convenience, let's look at the multi-functional centers where you can have access to dozens of public services. It's convenient, right? Everyone goes there. But on the other hand, every step you make, every day, if you go to such centers, they will be documented in the computer. Do we really trust that our state, having this information about every single step we make, that the state will not use these data in any adverse way? But there is too much of the state in this now. So the question of convenience of such a system to us should be discussed, and we should discuss the involvement of the state in every minute of our life, because it will not be very comfortable when someone learns that what I was doing maybe last night. I don't want everyone to know about it, right? That's why that's a delicate issue, but a very important one. So thank you for answering it, for asking it, and for tackling it. So here is what I was going to say. Even in terms of looking for a common language, it's about the liaison between the state and the science. It's a difficult challenge. Now, the state wants the role of the Academy of Sciences to become stronger. You know that the Academy of Sciences now actually is receiving the carte blanche to coordinate the whole scientific development coordination in the whole country. You know, it's a big challenge. When we are talking about the strategy of development of the country, I think it makes sense to understand the state and the science, where there is a role of public administration and what is not subject to public administration and control, like the pure scientific activities, research carried out by scientists. Now, considering all the new laws and regulations and with increasing funding, we have to solve these current challenges and problems. So what is science? Maybe it's a simple thing I'm going to say, but, you know, we have fundamental research science and applied sciences. Many scientists and managers say, no, all this is science. You cannot tell where the borderline is between these three types of science. No. It's very important to demarcate the different types of science in terms of management. There may be a risk, a high risk. For instance, if you say you are going to deliver something and 80% of what you promised you did not deliver, while in these 80% you wanted to deliver. These 18% could be about new discoveries of science. And if you are sure you are going to discover and you do not discover, you understand that the result of research is different than what you expected. There is a fairy tale by Schwartz, The Bear, and there is a brilliant movie which was made based on this fairy tale, Common Miracle. Well, there is a magician in this movie. He's planning an experiment. Consisting in the following: he turns a beautiful little bear into a beautiful young man, and if a princess kisses this beautiful young man, the young man will turn into a bear again. And this is an experiment which is made by a beginner magician. Well, probably in future he'll be a founding father of regenerative medicine or whatever. So he starts being a beginner. He starts this experiment. A princess and this young man falls in love. She kisses him, but the result is different. He doesn't turn into a bear. And, you know, the film director who shot this movie, he was a genius, and the magician at the end of the movie is discussing that it didn't work, this experiment. He discusses it with his wife, and his wife says, you know, but that's the beauty of it. You know, no business will go anywhere where there is a risk of 80% non-performance. The business will come and invest when there will be a lower risk of something not coming true. Then the question is this applicable for some specific purposes? So, scientists, for instance, have developed a method, a terribly accurate method of detecting the content of another gas in the air. This is important for security reasons, for safety, for whatever. Now, modern methods make it possible to diagnose one molecule among 10 or 12 million molecules. This is a brilliant result. This can be used in medicine, in agriculture, because agriculture is now trying to follow science advance. And this method, which was developed by fundamental scientists, can it be used to detect the first ever molecule signaling development of yeast and other toxic microorganisms, probably in agricultural warehouses where agricultural produce is being stored. So this is what industry should deal with, because we do not have industry science now. From the point of view of business, the business would say, okay, let me wait a little bit. Okay, it's not maybe 80 to 20% risk, but if it's 50-50, no, let me wait until the risk is much lower. And when the money is available to solve the problem, and when the scientists tell us definitely that these molecules can signal approach of a disease or can signal contamination of agricultural products or whatever. Because if we now implement this technology while it's still 50-50, sure, if we invest into this and if it doesn't work, no. So this is phase 3. The business likes to fund the applied phase of scientific research. And this is like our death valley in science, because this research, it's not where the state should be involved. It did its job already. It funded the fundamental studies, fundamental research, while the business is not yet eager to go and support it yet.
I thought that Alexey Kudrin would attend, and this idea of uninterrupted chains, which he announced several years ago, and he spoke about it at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. If the Russian science could be saved by this series of chains. And the business looks at the scientists and asks, well, you're doing some things, you're inventing things, but we're not much interested. And the scientists are saying, oh, well, that's what we can do. This is where our interest lies. We are not particularly interested in what you are interested in. So they don't want to be dealing with the application of the fundamental research ideas. So indeed, this gap needs to be bridged. How can we gap the bridge between the fundamental studies, between the fundamental research and the results, and the actual practical application? The high technology economy of scale is what we see in the West, and the high-tech economy of scale is willing to invest in this bridging the gap between the fundamental science and the practical application. Our economy is primarily resource-based. It's an extraction industry. It's an extraction-based economy. This is not to say that extraction-based economy does not need technology or innovation, but it certainly doesn't need it to the extent that the high-tech economy needs. So this is indeed the most important search venue to try and bring these two in line. A very interesting question. Something that has been referred to Mr. Chubais and Rosnano and the PAT scanning in medicine. This is a vivid example of that this system of chains doesn't seem to be working. PAT is golden standard. I think in the United States, there is 5 to 6 PAT installations per every million of inhabitants. In Russia, all in all, we have about 30 PAT screening devices, and all of these are imported. And these are indeed technologies where Russia has always been a pioneer in. Cyclotron, cameras, where we have, and we're not doing anything to offer to our people, to our medicine. This is an important view where we have how can we make this role. And in the framework of strategy and technology, there are these tasks of formulating major products, whereby we have to make some sort of agreement between the beneficiaries, and that the possible beneficiaries would agree to invest into PAT. I think that PAT may be such a great, pretty much nuclear medicine-oriented project. Or let's just take the agriculture. the so-called smart agriculture or automated agriculture. We're talking to the Ministry of Agriculture. If you help us to make a unified map of all the crops in this country, including not just geodesic information, but the actual weather map and the actual status of the crops. And this would allow to have a general monitoring view. A very interesting project indeed. There are many other projects which are related to that's an interesting. There was an interesting question. Is there a strategic vision? How we're going to have what will be the production resources in this country in 2030, for instance? Shall we have 15 major urban agglomerations, or should we? Or should we support all centers where we have 300 to 500 to 500,000 inhabitants? How shall we be moving across this country in 2030? Shall we be flying planes like the Americans do most of the time? Or eventually we shall start building high-speed roads? 30,000 kilometers of high-speed autoroutes in China to be planned for the next 10 years. And in Russia, by 2025, we're just about to have the first piece of our highway autoroute between Moscow going east to Vladimir. So these questions of strategic planning require involvement of scientists. And scientists must have some vested interest in doing this. And so we have to come together and try to map this route of communications and human capital by 2025 or 2030. We should not be bogged in discussion, and this piece of the Silk Road will simply be, this window will be closed, and this strategic state-based planning is very important for us to find a common language between the science, the business, and the strategy of the development of the country is exactly about that. And the 7 challenges that have been mentioned require this common language to be developed. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, colleagues, if I may express an opinion, I'm very thankful to Alexander Mikhailovich, and this is the first president of the Russian Academy of Sciences to talk before Gaidar Forum. But let me just remind ourselves of the danger of an overconfident economist. Strategies are very important, and this is what Maria spoke about. But let me also have some grain of doubt. We live in conditions when strategies are important to choose a path, but strategies are very important from the standpoint of practical implementation, because changing of environment is happening or may happen when the strategy has already been approved. I have been asked, what about the 2020 strategy? Did it have any percentile? Did it have any... do you understand, I'm asking in response, that when the 2020 strategy was written, there was no notion of blockchain, and cryptocurrency was a very exotic thing. In 2011, this strategy, which was prepared at that time, but or when we were writing the programs of Mr. Gref, the iPhone or smartphone, the smartphone technology was in the middle of its creation. So, is it to say that we have to continue going on with our strategic planning, notwithstanding the changes around us? And I think that this is a little bit of a doubt. I think that we should simply look for greater challenges already at the time when we're writing a strategy. We have to understand that sometimes strategies become obsolete in a very paradoxical way. You know, the Communist Party had an interesting program, a strategy of solving the food shortage problem in the Soviet Union by the year 2000. Well, the food shortage problem was solved in the Soviet Union, or in what was at that time Soviet Union, in Russia by the year 2000, but it was solved in a way radically different from what the Communist Party could have predicted or planned. So so there is a strategy in some cases, but well, thank you very much. Just a very short opinion. Yes, that's a very difficult question that you've asked. But do we believe that the Communist Party of China, when it started its grand process, did it have a strategy? The grand process, the grand reform of the communist, of the Chinese system. A lot has changed in the Chinese economy, but the strategic vision must be present. There must be flexibility. And there has to be this. There has to be a flexible approach, and I can't agree more. There has to be a vector, but there has to be a vector, and what I'm afraid of is that we don't have a vector. So, we have to be very adaptive to these oscillations of the pendulum. We may be talking about year 2030 or 2040. If we go back to the beginning of the 90s, for instance, we didn't have web, we didn't have internet. And it appears that we could not predict at that time what would the internet do. The time within which we're seeing the changes is becoming more and more swift. It may be that we could not expect that in 2035. Can we expect that by the year 2030 some novel technological solution which is simply not existent? Can we propose that some new technology will set the course of our life in our everyday life in 20 years? Well, thank you for this. The problems of public administration, as discussed 3 years ago, I think that we would have not been talking about the digital platform or state as a digital platform. But even 18 months ago, we would not have spoken about it. Well, 18 months ago, there was already a mature concept of it in the society. But there is this somewhat vulgar, as it comes from the Soviet political parlance, but a true statement that the cadre or the personnel resolves on everything. So the reason why I quote this is that we have to realize that the decision takers are of importance. Well, thank you very much. But before we talk about this cadre, and indeed, we started talking about the models of public administration, and Dr. Sergei spoke about the changes, aristocracy, bureaucracy, corpocracy, and technocracy as the four possible models whereby the starting from the 18th century, we had the bureaucracy as the overarching ruling model, and we had this great importance and attributed great importance to the procedures. Towards the beginning of the 20th century, we embarked on this new world of project management, client-oriented corpocracy, if you will. But today, the world is drifting towards a new model, which can arguably termed as technocracy, a state as a platform. And this model is presenting new challenges and requirements to those who work for the civil service, for the public administration, for the system of state governance, related to our future. So this migration from the age of corporations to the age of technological revolution is becoming a starting point for a discussion. If we can see the role of the state dwindling or on the contrary, increasing. So here on the axis, on the abscissa axis, we have the probability of risk, and on the ordinate axis, on the y-axis, we have the ability of the state to prevent a risk or to preclude an unfavorable event from happening. So here we're talking about the degree of the possible influence of actors on these matters, and this may pertain to such far and wide topics as the AI, human genome, cryptocurrency. We are less and less oriented towards a more rigid procedural ways. So we are seeing a new group or stratum of people to emerge, and we may continue to argue this picture, but would probably not be able to reject the fact that we're seeing a migration towards a holistic approach, an approach oriented towards an overall picture.
And this is what our new educational policy and educational product should focus on. The industries that are supposed to educate people to live in this new age. But unfortunately, currently, the products the education industry has now are very far away from being in line with this current demand. Here you can see what, based on poll of our Russian institutes, training public servants, what they have and what they do not have is listed in this table. And we see that many things that do exist and are being implemented in other developed countries in our country, either are non-existent or not yet being fully implemented. And in some areas in our country, even demand for such methods is not yet existent. At the same time, we understand that we are now getting more and more in line with modern requirements. I see three curricula, three programs of the Russian Academy of National Economy. Here it's administration, excellence, development of regional teams, higher public administration, succession plan, and also training of management teams for development of single industry cities. And all these changes are taking place worldwide, not just in public administration, of course. In this slide, you can see 10 most demanded competencies by 2020 based on the opinion of experts of the Davos World Economic Forum. And I didn't even translate it into Russian because these words, they are well known to everyone sitting in this audience, I think. Complex problem solving, it's creative thinking, critical thinking, emotional intelligence, and so on. And of course, no one says that basic knowledge is not important, and in any case will not be able to do without basic knowledge and basic science. And there was a short discussion with Mr. Gref about artificial intelligence and how humans will be integrated into this future system. Shows to us that the skills I was talking about are the skills that still will enable us, if not win in our competition with artificial intelligence, but at least will make us differ from the smart machines, which will very probably dominate in future. So to save time, I'm not going to talk about requirements to public administration, which we currently see, and I'm not going to paint for you a portrait of a public servant who is supposed to live up to the modern challenges. But there is one more thing I would like to tackle, though, even if it has no direct link to this topic of our discussion and even to my presentation. It's our attitude to education as such. We know that now one peak educational model, single peak model is being replaced by multi-peak models when we learn many different things throughout our life. It's not just one thing we learn and live with it. So now our attitude to learning, to education, it's not that if you say that you want to learn something, it should not mean that you don't know something. No, you want to know more. Could you please raise your hands if you have any positive emotions, if your boss tells you, I want you to undergo a training or whatever? Do you really feel good? Oh, that's nice. I know that's because we have such an audience here. But if you ask some middle-level public servant about this, I'm sure the answer will be different, because he will most probably think, my boss suggested I go for a training. Probably he's not satisfied with my knowledge. Probably I'm doing something wrong, or at least the guy will be, if not scared, but at least not very enthusiastic to go to this training. That's why our goal now is to promote the idea that learning is not shameful. It's shameful not to learn. And I would even reword it. It's not shameful not to learn, but it's shameful to think that it's shameful. And again, I would like to finish my presentation by an English phrase, which actually is about all I wanted to tell you today. If we want to compete on a global level, if we want to build the state which would be a true platform, like our previous speakers said, we have no choice other than to transform people, educate people, or find new public administrators. We have no other choice. Thank you. Thank you, Alexey. But tell me, during this year, during past year, you already enumerated a couple of very important programs you have launched, but there were some others, like the top management succession plan program, and one more. Was there something in these other programs you did last year that made you change your mind about HR policy in public administration? Was there anything that would that has surprised you, let's say so? I was probably surprised by a huge gap. A gap between what we teach students at our different courses and what all our top managers see in real life. On the one hand, it's a shame, because when coming back to common life, to their workplaces and whatever, they really have an impression that, oh, well, it's nice to listen to clever people telling us clever things, but in real life, it's all the opposite. And even though there is such a huge gap between what we discuss here during this session and what we teach in our training courses and what happens in real life, still, if there is such a gap, yet all those top managers who really promote these good ideas in their teams, they really have a chance to overcome the gap. Step by step, of course, not right now, but small steps will turn into one big transformation, and the approach will change. That's what makes me enthusiastic. Thank you. We have Lord Francis Maude, ex-member of British Parliament. He worked for the government of the UK. And I would like to ask Francis to respond to what he heard here during this session. Could you please?
Thank you very much, Vladimir. And I apologize that I shall speak in English. My Russian is non-existent, I'm afraid, beyond saying spasiba for inviting me to be with you today on this great occasion. I've heard so much about the Gaidar Forum, and it's a privilege to take part in it. Well, thank you, Vladimir. And my a bit about more about my background. I was for 27 years an elected member of Parliament in Britain. For 13 years, I was a minister, starting as a minister with Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s, and most recently, I was the minister in David Cameron's cabinet, responsible for the public administration reform programme. And we had three powerful objectives. We had to cut the cost of government. Government was too expensive. We had a huge budget deficit in Britain, a budget deficit of some 11% of the economy, of gross domestic product, GDP. We wanted to become the most digital government in the world, so digital transformation was the second strand. And the third strand of activity was around open data and transparency, where we set ourselves the goal of becoming the most open government in the world. Well, in the space of 5 years, we cut some equivalent of some $75 billion US from the running costs of government, the overhead costs of central government, national government. We became ranked in 2016 by the UN. We were ranked the most digital government in the world, and several international organizations have said that the UK, Britain, is now the most open government in the world. And all of these things were very closely related. The efficiency program, the cost-cutting program, the digital transformation, and the open data program. I want to pick up some of the points that have been made. Very interesting to hear the presentation about government as a platform. This is undoubtedly where effective governments will be in 20 years' time. At what stage in the next 20 years they genuinely create government as a platform depends on numerous factors. But the point I think several colleagues on this platform have made is that it's one thing to write a strategy, it's quite another thing to implement it. And too often in public administrations, we see people for whom the writing of the strategy is the end in itself, whereas actually the really difficult task comes when it comes to implementation, execution. And why is that? It's because governments generally, public administrations generally, bureaucracies, tend to have a bias to inertia. Colleagues have made the point, this is an incredibly fast-changing world. The pace of change, the speed of change, is accelerating all the time. Governments are this one place where disruption is still seen as a negative word, whereas in business, disruption, constant disruption, is seen as a positive. You need to change the way things are done, challenge existing ways of doing things. In the Civil Service College in Singapore, they have on the wall a mantra, a dictum, which simply says, it's the duty of every public servant constantly to challenge existing ways of doing things and suggest new ways to improve it. Now, most government systems are hostile to innovation. Not explicitly, they all will use the word, they will say they support innovation, but actually public servants who innovate, who do things that don't work, can pay a penalty for that. There are very few incentives in public administration to innovate. So the embracing of technology and innovation is absolutely essential in a world where there is no longer any steady state management. There was a time when people thought you achieve maximum efficiency and then you manage the organization in steady state, in business as usual. That's no longer possible because the challenges are changing all the time, and the possibilities for doing things differently and better are changing all the time. So what are the principal challenges today for public administration? Well, the public's expectations of government are changing all the time. People expect governments to respond to them as quickly and as efficiently as the best of businesses do. People expect to conduct much of their life through their own personal technology, through smartphones or tablets, and to be able to interact with businesses quickly and instantaneously online. They don't generally expect to be able to interact with the government, with the state, in that way. So digital transformation is absolutely fundamental to this. The expectations of citizens are increasing, and the costs of, and the quantity of demand is increasing as well, because in every country, pretty much, people are living longer. We're having older and older populations. People are living longer. Their needs in terms of social care and health care are growing, and the ability of governments to finance the provision of those services is, in every country that I know of, is limited. And so we need to be better at cutting the overhead costs, the running costs of the state, of government, while making more money available for the frontline services on which our citizens depend. And so this process of cutting the costs, which in the UK, we cut the size of the civil service, we downsized the civil service by more than 20%. We renegotiated contracts with the biggest suppliers to government because we found that the government was paying for things that it didn't need. There was wasteful spending there, and we renegotiated those contracts. We got out of property that wasn't needed, and I'll come back to that in a moment to say a word more about that. And of course, we made many services digital. And a word about the property, the real estate. Most governments are structured in a way that simply reflects historical accident. Most governments will have a system of ministries, departments, and agencies, which with some variation has probably been roughly recognizable from the late 19th century or the early 20th century. In the UK and Britain from around the middle of the 19th century. And that's based around buildings and human resources structures, people structures and hierarchies. And for the citizen as taxpayer, the citizen as the user, consumer of public services, the citizen doesn't care about the structure, doesn't care which bit of government they're dealing with. They just want to be able to interact, to get the information they need quickly and efficiently, and mostly now online. And they want to be able to transact with the government, whether that's a question of paying their taxes or getting a permit for a particular activity, or enabling them to conduct some other transaction. They want that to be efficient. And government as a platform, one of the reasons why, when it was first discussed as a concept, now some 5 or 6 years ago, I remember as a cabinet minister in Britain making a speech about government as a platform, the state as a platform, as long ago as late 2014, so more than 3 years ago. The reason why it's so challenging is that it challenges the very structure of the way the state in most countries around the world is configured. Because behind the concept of the government as a platform is that you would have single data, registries of data, single databases for companies and businesses, for people. At the moment, government has a number of different databases, and often the quality of the data on those databases is quite poor, it's quite inaccurate, and there will be differences between inaccuracies, discrepancies between those databases. So fundamental to it is having single databases which are not under the sole control of a particular part of government, which is what tends to be the case at the moment. Across the top of those databases would be common services, which can be applied for different functions. A single payment service, a single identity assurance service, a single service for making appointments, for example. We found in the British government there were 132 different payment systems, which is both inefficient and creates errors and inaccuracies and enables fraud. And then enabling bodies outside government, businesses and others, through APIs to create value-added services by having access in a controlled way, into those databases. And this is what government as a platform can create. It's incredibly powerful, but no one should underestimate the strength of the vested interests that would resist that kind of move. But that's where the big benefits will come in terms of reducing the cost of government and freeing up funds to fund the frontline public services on which we will increasingly be dependent. And through open data, through releasing government data sets much more freely to the public, we increase the public's awareness and the public's ability to hold a government to account, because that's crucial to the continual improvement of public services and public administration that we all seek to see. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I would like to give the floor to Andrei Slepnev, Deputy Chief of Government Staff of the Russian Federation. He is in charge of one more division. There it's implementation of project-based approach in public administration. And I would like also to thank him that with his support and that his initiative, the Center of Project Management was opened in our Russian Presidential Academy of National Economy and Public Administration, and it's a very successful center. We are glad to have it, and I'm very glad that he is in charge of it. But my question to you is the following. Do you think maybe this is just a fashion now? We invented this beautiful term or word, thinking that this will be a magic word that will save us now. Then in 3 or 4 years, we'll invent something else and say, this is what is going to save us. So this project-based method, project-based approach, is this a must? Is this a need? Is this a way to solve the problems in public administration?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. We have prepared, we have trained or certified over 1,000 persons over the past year. They are certified civil servants today, and we plan to continue with this program, both on the federal, national and regional levels. So we expect to increase this number, and we are encouraged by the interest shown towards this. In a way, this is a very healthy fashion, which means that people are interested in change and they're willing to invest their time and effort into making the system of civil service better. We're talking about leadership oriented for result, and apart from public and project management, there are also instruments and means. This is in a way an armed reconnaissance and availing of Mr. Gref's. So you are experimenting on people. Is that what you're saying? Well, no, we're doing it a very tender way. All right. There are some results which we have seen, and something that is called the minimal sustainability, something that we have been able to improve, and there are some results. We hope to present them soon, and we can see great demand for these both on the national and regional levels. Certainly, without like-minded colleagues in the regions, it would be next to impossible to introduce a change. So what we're talking today is not just introduction of a new mechanism or writing some lines or repainting some old pictures. No, it's a cultural transformation. Why do I speak about cultural transformation? To a large extent, civil servants in Russia today are in a situation of probably at the same level of corporate culture as in the 1990s. So we see many big problems. There are many objective reasons and causes, torrent of information, new ways of perceiving and processing data. So inadequacy of many of the civil servants has become a reality, which necessitated introduction of these new models. And as to this cultural transformation, which I have just mentioned, something that we all have to undergo, this includes a systemic approach, because in here we have to have as many as I said, like-minded allies as we can. We need every bit of support. And this also deals with the growing interest of the citizens in the matters of public administration. And today, consulting with the population, with the people living in the particular municipality, city, or settlement, town, for that matter, has become a must. So it's also a control problem. There is no better way of controlling the quality of road construction other than the monitoring of social media. And this deals with the monitoring of social media, of social networks, has allowed to introduce a great set of recommendations. There is another point to be made. The so-called a function of the public inspector, whereby a person may record the fact of violation of traffic rules by his camera, which becomes acceptable and may become acceptable by the courts. The initiatives for bettering urban environment, which deals with the whole set of initiatives, the choice of objects and elements of urban architecture and design, which, as we hope, these initiatives will entail improving the environment, the urban environment in which we live, and the element of direct participation, of direct civic participation, is becoming increasingly important as we speak about the change in the society. I think that today the technologies are substituting in a way political mediators, and the American elections have shown brilliantly this role of direct participation technologies and the direct rapport between the politicians and the voters. We simply can't ignore these elements. Singapore, the very stable economy, has had a political crisis because it did not react adequately to the protests in the social media because of the military base. There's something that would have been inconceivable 5 years ago. So I think that this matter of direct civic participation is becoming a salient feature of the political landscape in every country, including Russia. So involvement of citizens is a must. And a few words about strategic planning and management. What we a balanced set of goals is a task for 2018. Without having a set of clearly defined strategic goals, the initiatives are probably doomed to fail. And one should not start the engine of a motorboat without understanding the course. And from the standpoint of the budgetary assignments and the governmental support, we should remember about the need of continuing with the project management. In terms of change management, this is a very specific field. There's a high role of the so-called enlightened leadership in this area, and but it is clear that this ocean of data requires monitoring and ways of analysis. Let me remind ourselves of a well-known maxim that before building a tower, we have to see if we have everything requisite to build a tower. On the IT market, we're continuing to monitor changes. There are some critical comments about Sberbank, which has mobilized the best IT professionals in Russia without leaving others. So we need professionals. This is a great must. We are great. We're great in keeping with the schedule, and I can, for the first time in this forum, ask for 2 questions coming from the audience. We have time for just two two questions, which is remarkable in terms of how we keep to our agenda. Mr. Novichkov, I have a question to Maria and Mr. Alexandrov. The state or civil service functions that we are now discussing, 80% of these emerged in the 20th century because the state became omnipresent in the 20th century. But state as a platform may unfortunately become an environment for multiplication of functions. Do you believe, do you perceive this as danger, as a threat? Well, according to the Moscow Higher School of Economics, we have had a doubling of functions. No, we're talking about different things. Bureaucracy functions as a set of functions that I understand the question. No, and if I may quote an example. My colleague has spoken as to how the government is discussing the public inspector initiative. 3.5 years ago, we supported a startup project for creating a mobile application for recording the traffic rule violations in St. Petersburg. This mobile app was developed, and how did the state react? Once the service started to develop, they started to block the IPs and stopped accepting these complaints coming from private citizens. Now it is being discussed on the governmental level. It is not that the state must become everything in this platform. No, the state must become a part of this environment. If there is something that is already being successful and done by the business, the state must comply with this, must come into conformity or harmonize itself with it. Otherwise, we would not see this as an efficient instrument, but would rather, as you rightly said, would see it as a multiplication of the state functions. So the good news is that this platform. The good news is that this platform can only exist through great private initiative. Even though I am an economist, there is the philosophical liberalism and there is the pragmatic liberalism. Philosophical liberalism is when you say that that individual is more important than the state. But practical or pragmatic liberalism is somewhat different. The state efficiently must be big because of a very complex world, because of the complexities of the world around us. This is not to say that we should be increasing the number of bureaucratic functions or the number of red tape offices, but as we remember, if we remember the example of the Russian Empire, we have about 30 functions, and in Britain this parameter is 40. Big state or big government and small government is a very relative concept. So I think that the length of borders of Russia, the geographical expanse, is an important determinant in we had this great difference in the functional expense of the state. So a lot depends on the historical conditions. The cases, the successful cases in the 20th century of an efficient state, where the states, where the GDP countries, where the GDP, national GDPs was high. The most successful cases in the past 50 years have been those with the budgetary load less. And here, it's not just about the number of computers per capita, it's about how this GDP is used. We go back to the words of the Russian writer in the beginning of the 19th century. Nikolai Gogol said that the two major ills of Russia are the fools and the roads. And it really is about the basic functions. Independent judiciary and is in this sense a great formula. Two little announcements to make before we conclude. We have an interesting coincidence. We have published a book in English which is called Russian Strategy, Policy and Administration, edited by Irvin Studin, and the first chapter in this book is by Mr. Kudrin and your humble servant, and this book has been published, and I'm very thankful. And Mr. Auzan and many others are part of this book. And the second piece of information, we started to publish the Russian Journal of Economics. It's a joint initiative by our academy and the Moscow School of Economics. It's an original publication, and I recommend this as a new piece in the Russian publishing tradition. Thank you very much for this very interesting session. Our next session is on macroeconomics. Thank you.